Imagine a stranger showing up at your house and telling you you aren't who you really are. Imagine someone measuring your head, your chest, and your nose. They scratch your skin to see if it turns red or white. They record all of this information and then tell you your brother is one race while you are another. For the Ojibwe on the White Earth Reservation, this isn't just something to imagine, it is something that happened. The United States government performed ridiculous tests using tools similar to the ones shown. These tests were used to determine whether or not an Ojibwe person was a mixed blood or a full blood. If an Ojibwe was a mixed blood, they were deemed competent and their land could be taxed, sold, or taken away by the U.S. government. Though taking Ojibwe land isn't what White Earth was supposed to be about. The White Earth Reservation was created in 1867. 800,000 acres were set aside for all Ojibwe, except those of Red Lake, to be relocated to. White Earth was supposed to be the ideal, an example of the success of assimilation. The plan was for all Ojibwe in Minnesota to be moved to the White Earth Reservation. There, they would be given land, become farmers, and leave their native traditions behind. In 1889, the government enacted the Nelson Act. This divided the land into 160-acre parcels, with each family receiving one parcel. The remaining land was sold to non-natives. The families were to live and farm the land for 25 years, after which it could be taxed and sold. Policymakers thought that these activities would hasten the effects of assimilation through new relations to capitalism and market behavior. This westernization of native communities promoted dependency, which was the opposite of their traditional customs. Many of the Ojibwe people at White Earth were going hungry because the allotment of the land disrupted their normal seasonal cycle. They were unable to rely on nature for sustenance because much of the land was now privately owned. The Burke Act of 1906 declared that any native considered competent was allowed to sell their land and would be taxed. The Clap Rider, passed in 1906, allowed Ojibwe people who contained a certain amount of European ancestry in their genetics to sell their land before the 25-year trust period had ended. These Ojibwe people were said to have mixed blood rather than full blood. The relative fractions of white and Native American blood that a Native American individual contained in their genetics became known as that person's blood quantum. Banks, entrepreneurs, and lumber companies used this opportunity to buy land from Ojibwe families, many of whom were desperate for the quick money. Some of the land purchased was from Ojibwe people who were mixed-blood Ojibwe and could not legally sell their land. Allegations of fraud arose against the land purchasers, as they were buying land illegally. As a result, it became necessary to have a fixed definition of mixed blood. Lawmakers decided any amount of white blood was enough to declare an Ojibwe as a mixed blood Ojibwe. Two anthropologists, Albert Jenks and Eliz Herglichka, developed a pseudoscientific method using ridiculous tests to establish blood quantum. A few of the characteristics that Jenks testified could be used to determine mixed blood status were finer, lighter, curlier hair, lighter eyes, nose narrowing, lighter complexion, and a face with a more upright position. The method used was later determined to be inaccurate and not scientifically sound. Nonetheless, this test was used to declare many Ojibwe as competent, mixed-blood Indians. Therefore, many of the charges of fraud were dropped, and the Ojibwe could not legally recover their land. It is due to these acts that the White Earth Reservation went from this to this. Despite many non-native protests claiming that giving back native rights was unfair, the Ojibwe continued to fight for the return of their land and rights. In 1983, the White Earth Land Settlement Act was proposed. This bill was to compensate the White Earth people by paying them $3 million, while clearing title to White Earth lands retroactively. In 1986, the then current tribal chairman, Darrell Wadena, flew to Washington, D.C. and secured the passage of this bill, against wishes of the majority of the community. Since the land had been sold, the natives still continued to fight to regain their land. In 1989, a private organization known as the White Earth Land Recovery Project was founded. With this project, Native people worked to return land by buying it back from willing sellers and trying to transfer public lands back to the tribal government. The White Earth Land Recovery Project doesn't just work to get land back, it also works to preserve Native languages and culture, restore traditional seed stocks, and reinstate self-determination and self-reliance. The Ojibwe people will not stop at trying to regain what they lost.
The American Indian Boarding School, as an institution of assimilation, was designed to suppress the culture, language, and spirituality of American Indian nations throughout the United States.
Her mother, my wife, is very sick and is nearly helpless now. My wife would like to have her daughter home while she is alive. Maddie has been away to school all her life and has never been home. My wife has got tuberculosis. So you see, she has a very slim chance for recovery.
It was not uncommon for boarding school administrators to receive letters similar to this one. Sickness and the disruption within Native families caused parents to write to schools asking if their children could return home. Oftentimes, the response these parents received was cold and disheartening.
It would be pretty bad for a school interest to leave now.
By 1892, Minnesota had established Indian boarding schools in Morris and Pipestone. These schools were based on Lieutenant Pratt's civilization program in Indian prisons. Many officers saw Pratt's success and took it upon themselves to follow his lead.
A shaky place. We were taken apart and different roles came into play. The role of the hunter provider was then taken from our men. The role of the gatherer, the nurturer was almost taken from the women. Their children were taken away and put in the boarding school systems.
Boarding schools not only tore families apart, but also the cultural roles that were a part of their everyday life. Parents often felt left out and in the dark when it came to their children. They had difficulty finding out if their children were sick or at any time of ailing.
Grace was at the office yesterday and complains that she is very homesick for her mother and father and asked me to write you if you could send her enough money so she can go home for the summer vacation. These children have not been home for 2 years, and this is their second summer here. Naturally, they would get lonesome. Anything you can do for this little daughter will make her happy.
The cost of a round trip was over $30 for the children to return home in the summertime. The average income of most families was only $80 a year.
The only thing I can remember is that we were boarded onto school buses, and we traveled for about 2 or 3 days before we reached our destination, which was Pipestone Indian School. All our matrons and teachers talked to us very harshly, and we were punished if we didn't do things right.
Native American children were brought to boarding schools to kill the Indian in them. One of the first Native traditions to come under assault at boarding schools was the names of the Indian students. Symbolically, the casting off of the Indian name and the assumption of a Christian name was the first sign that civility had indeed touched the savage. Students across Indian country realized that losing their first tongue as a result of being immersed in English for years of schooling was a devastating result of government education. Children were forced to cut their hair and wear uniforms.
They cut off my hair, they make fun of me when they come by me.
In 1905, the capacity for a boarding school was 350 students, and the enrollment was 435 students, meaning that oftentimes there were 2 children sharing a bed. Overcrowding and malnutrition caused epidemics of contagious diseases such as trachoma and tuberculosis, which sometimes led to death. Parents would receive tragic letters similar to this one.
She was not sick but a short time, and we did not think her so near her end. I was very much surprised upon my return Saturday evening to find she was dead.
Tuberculosis, trachoma, and other serious diseases flourished in the overcrowded dormitories and classrooms, many times leading to death.